This is part 2 of my drive-by-wire calibration and tuning of a throttle body running on an AEM Infinity ECU. In part 1 we covered the calibration of a throttle body. In this video we will actually cover the tuning of PIDs and the bias table of any given throttle body. First step is to go over to Infinity Tuner and connect your software to the ECU. And once connected, what we want to do is we want to shut off all signals to the throttle body. Basically want to disable the throttle body. Go to Wizards, Setup Wizard, go to Drive-by-Wire Tuning, and uncheck the Drive-by-Wire 1 User Enable. And what we're trying to do is find, we'll call it the rest position of the throttle plate without any force or input signals being sent to the drive-by-wire throttle body. So at this point it's disabled, and if you notice over here, this throttle percentage, mine, I can hit my throttle and basically my throttle percentage stays at about 8.5. So for my throttle body, 8.5 is kind of that resting position of my throttle plate without any force or signals being sent to it. I need to take a note of that value because we're going to use that value in the baseline of our tuning. So at this point, you can go ahead and close this. Go to the drive-by-wire tab. Right there, we're already on it. And just blip the throttle a few times just to make sure that this throttle percentage does not move. See where the throttle percentage rests and key this rest value into the drive-by-wire bias table in the center, or what I'll call the 0 cell, as a drive-by-wire target percentage. Right here, this is the 0 cell value. It says 0.4, but it's as close to 0 as we can get without the system overriding it to a 0.4 that's close enough. You'll notice this is the corresponding rest position where I don't want to send any bias to the throttle body. In this particular case, it's currently set to 9.5. I want to make this value match my rest position of 8.5. So I'm going to change that to 8.5. And it's just saying I can't have two values of 8.5, so it's going to force this value to change to something else. Let's just change this to 1 for right now. Change this value to 8.5. Okay, so now this 8.5 on my 0 bias matches my rest position. Now what we want to do is we want to add between 0.5 and 1% to the x-axis value just to the right, as well as subtract the same amount as the value as that same value just to the left. So in this case, just to the right, I've got 10.5. I need this value to be basically 0.5% or 1% larger than 8.5. So I need to set this value right here to either 9 or 9.5. Let's go ahead and set it to 9.5. I'm going to use 1%. And over here, we want to go, if I'm going to go 1% up here, I want to go 1% down here. So we'll make this one 7.5. And as far as the first value and the last value of this x-axis, they should be 0 and 100% respectively. I don't need to change those. Basically, we want to make sure that we're encompassing the complete range of the throttle body and its throttle plate movement from 0 to 100%. All right, at this point, we are ready to re-enable the throttle body. And before I do, I'm going to go ahead and commit these changes to the x-axis. And let's turn our throttle body back on. Let's go to Wizards, Setup Wizard, go right back into drive-by-wire tuning and check this box right here, drive-by-wire 1, user enable. and then go ahead and click on Show Advanced Setup. And what we want to do here, I've already zeroed them out. You're probably going to see values in here, but what you're going to want to do is zero your PIDs, your proportional, your integral, and your derivative gains. We basically don't want to be sending any gain values to the throttle body while we're doing our tuning. Also, make sure you go to the very end of this wizard and make sure this box is not checked. Normally it will be checked. It's probably checked on yours. When we're all done tuning, we're going to go ahead and check this box again, but while we're tuning, we don't want any errors to be tracked. Tuning the PIDs sometimes will trigger errors, and it can be frustrating trying to get your PIDs to tune, so we just disable it for the tuning process. Go ahead and close the wizard. And back to the drive-by-wire tab. And again, we've established this is our zero value in the center. And I should mention that you'll notice that there's negative values to the left and positive values to the right. The negative values are used to send a closed signal to the throttle plate. Positive values will send an open signal to the throttle plate. These signals are kind of fighting against the spring tension, so open signals will generally need to be stronger than closed signals. All right. As far as tuning this particular table, we're going to use this plot window right here. And right out of the gate, we want to remove all channels except for, so go ahead and right click up here and let's go set channels. And what we want on this plot window for tuning purposes is just the drive-by-wire 1 TPSA, this one right here, and we also want the drive-by-wire target, this one right here. Everything else, whatever you have in this box, needs to be removed, at least temporarily. So let's remove engine speed in this case, and let's remove throttle. All right, and go ahead and hit OK. Oh, let's hit OK. Let's go back in, right click, and let's go to Properties. And I want to change the scale, set the vertical range, and make sure that the vertical range is set between 0 and 100%, or 0 and 100, which is representative of your throttle range from 0% to 100%. And you'll want to make sure that it's set that way on both of these. 0 to 100, good. And set number format, I usually use to one decimal place. You need enough granularity to see what's going on, and I think 1 decimal place does the job fine. Okay, so we're going to use this log. We're going to use this to log throttle action to see how well the throttle is tracking to the target. So again, we're also going to use not just this log, but we're going to use these gauges right here as well. Again, the same channels we're showing here: drive-by-wire target and drive-by-wire 1 throttle position sensor. Okay, again, reminder: make sure your PIDs are set to 0, or you'll be doing this all over again. Now what we're going to do is we're going to work the two positive bias percentage values, these two far right columns on the table. And the idea is we want to get these two to track each other. And watch when you'll notice the target percentage moves much slower than the throttle position sensor. So what I'm trying to do is get those two to basically track with each other. And the best way to do this is, again, to describe it on the throttle, is you want to move the throttle as smoothly as possible, but reasonably quickly, all the way up to 100% when you do this tracking test. So you don't want to go too fast and you don't want to go too slow either. Just kind of a nice steady progression in your testing. And also, generally, as a rule of thumb, I increment in steps of 5%, values of 5 on a 100% scale. I also increment the last column. When I say increment, I mean these values. I usually go between, I'll try a 10%, 15, 20, 25, and then whatever this value is, I'll usually make this value about 5% larger. Let's go ahead and just log real quick my throttle movement. Now you can see there's a much easier way to see how it's tracking. We basically want that green and white line to be basically overlapped with each other. So you can see one is lagging behind the other, and that's what we're going to go ahead and fix. Also, one other note, since we're working the positive side, what we want to do is we want to make sure that we're incrementing both of these values, this value and this value, at the same time. Obviously, we're moving the throttle through the complete range, going from neutral to 100 neutral throttle resting position, 8.5%, all the way to 100%. So we need to make sure that we cover both bases. So let's just, for demonstration purposes, let's set this to 5 and let's set this to 10. And again, you may key in 5 and 10, it's gonna skew it just by a little bit. That's okay. We're close enough to 5 and 10 in this particular case. And now, if you look down here, in here, you'll notice I can't even get the TPS to even respond. So that's telling me that I do not have enough force being sent to, force commanded being sent to the throttle plate to open it up. So obviously 5 and 10 values are too small. So let's go up by 5. Let's do 10 and 15. And let's check them. Again, not enough force. Let's do 15 and 20. And check them. And you can see we're just now starting to get movement, but we're still too soft, so we're going to have to climb it higher. Let's do 20 and 25. And it's still got to go higher. 25 and 30. And I can at least get to 100%, but it's still dragging a bit, especially there at the end, where probably spring tension is even greater. So we're going to go ahead and bump this up by another 5. Let's try 30 and 35. And now you can see we're starting to get it in there very close. Again, a nice smooth movement of the throttle, and it tracks fairly well. Let's just see, let's go up a little higher to the point where it's obviously too much, and then we'll back it off. 35 and 40. And you'll notice now we're almost going too fast. The TPS is outpacing the drive-by-wire target. So I think the right number is 30 and 35. And don't get too hung up on this thing exactly tracking. Remember, our PIDs are set to 0 right now. So when we get to actually adjusting our gain values, we'll get this to really sync up nicely with our feedback gains. So for right now, I think we're good on the positive side of this table. Now we're going to need to work on the negative values. Again, the goal here is to get the throttle percent value in the grid to come to rest at about the same place as the drive-by-wire target. So if the drive-by-wire target is 5.9, then what we want is we want the throttle position to also rest at about 5.9. Right now it's resting at 8, so we don't have quite enough close force being sent to the throttle body. So we need to force it closed a little bit more. That tells me these values aren't large enough, or I should say, numerically speaking, small enough to force the throttle plate closed to 5.9. So at this point in time, let's go ahead and do the same thing. Remember, we're working with negative values, and sometimes you might miss a negative key and a positive and wonder why it's responding a certain way. So just go back and change it to a negative value. Again, same process applies here. We want to increment these last column by an additional 5% over this one. So we're already at 10 and 15. Let's do negative 15 and negative 20. And I usually blip the throttle, and now you'll notice that my 8% came down to 6.7%, closer to my drive-by-wire target. And at this point in time, I'm not trying to do a smooth movement of my throttle. I'm just doing quick blips to try and get it to rest real quick and see where it lands. So I think we need to go a little bit higher. -20. And negative 25. Oh, in there you can see I missed it. Look, my throttle percent is almost 100%. I did not key in negative values, so you're going to know right away. Okay, we went a little bit too far. We're targeting 5.9. We're actually about 1% lower, so we need to throttle this back a little bit, so no pun intended. Let's do negative 18 and negative 23. And let's see how close that gets us. Very close. In fact, I think that's about as close as we're going to get it. So you can see we're targeting 5.9 and our throttle percent is 5.8. I think that's pretty darn good. So we'll call that done for the negative side of the bias table. I'm going to go ahead and commit those changes. All right. Now that the throttle percent and the drive-by-wire target track each other fairly well, now it's time to actually tune the drive-by-wire PIDs. With the P, the I, and the D all set to 0 to start with, we're going to first start in this sequential order, the proportional gain first, then the integral, and then the derivative. And what we want to do is we want to begin to increment up in single whole numbers until, when quickly blipping the throttle, it begins to flutter. And hopefully my mic will pick up the flutter of the throttle body. If not, you're going to be listening for basically a quick fluttering of the throttle body after you let off the throttle, and it tries to come to an idle rest. So let's go ahead and go to Wizards, Setup Wizard, and we're going to go back into drive-by-wire tuning, Show Advanced Setup, and we were in here earlier when we zeroed out our PIDs. Now we're going to do our PID tuning, and let's just close this box up a little bit so we can see what's going on here. In fact, before I go any further, let's go back here. I forgot to show you one thing. Let's go ahead and just check our work using the log. So let's go ahead and just run another log. And again, you can see that we still have a lag. Depending on how fast or how slow we depress the pedal, we can try and get it to match. But bottom line is the PIDs are going to clean all this up now and get these two to match almost perfectly. So back to our PIDs. So again, let's start with our P gain. Again, it's got to be in this sequence. Let's start with 4. What I'm doing right now is I'm basically blipping the throttle, and pay attention to the TPS. You'll notice that that's the flutter I'm talking about. You can visually see the flutter on the gauge, and if we go up real high, I'm hoping you'll actually be able to hear it on my video. Let's do 8. You can see it going crazy, and you probably can hear that as well. And if you could look at my throttle bodies, on my throttle body plate, like I am right now, it's just going crazy. And you can see it on the log right here as well. So let's get rid of that. So that's basically the effect we're looking for. So what we're trying to do is basically ratchet up the proportional gain as close as we dare until it starts fluttering. And then once it starts fluttering, we want to back down the P gain. And that's going to give us the quickest throttle response possible. Our proportional gain is going to move the throttle quicker than any of the other 2 gains. So again, we don't want to go too far, but we want to get it as close as we can. So let's just start with 5 now, and 5 is too much. Let's do 4.5. 4.5 is too much. And we were at 4 originally. And while it doesn't flutter on its own, we can certainly see down with the gauge that there's still a little bit of a flutter at the end before it settles down. So we know we need to go less than 4. Let's go all the way down to 3 for a moment. And 3 is pretty good. Let's split the difference and go 3.5. And 3.5 is pretty good. I can see it maybe fluttering just a bit. And sometimes, just to get a feel for it, I kind of go up and down around where I'm honing in at. And I think that's too much flutter. Let's try 3.25. And that's pretty good. I'm going to also stop my plot real quick because I've logged for so long that I can't quite get the granularity I'm looking for. And I'll just start the log again, fresh. And you can see, just with the proportional gain, no matter what speed I move, the throttle, it's now tracking each other very closely. That's exactly what we want, and we haven't even gotten to the I or the D gain at this point. So, with that said, let's go back into our PIDs. And I think we're going to settle in somewhere between 3.25 and 3.5. One more test on 3. Yeah, I'm going to call it 3.25. Yeah, I think that's about where we want it. Now let's move on to the I value and go through the same procedure with smaller increments, say half the increment value, and then we'll move on to the D. So we're at 3, so let's just start. Let's start at 1. And what the integral gain does for us is the P gain, while it moves the feedback very quickly, sometimes we can overshoot our mark or undershoot. Actually, it makes one primary adjustment. The integral gain will start looking at the target and determine if it's overshooting or undershooting, and then correcting for it, either by taking gain away or putting gain in, or feedback in or taking feedback away. So at this point, let's just go up a little bit higher. And again, we're still looking for that flutter. You're not going to see the flutter response like you do on the proportional gain, since that's like using a big hammer when we're tuning. And the integral gain is a slightly more refined hammer, smaller, and then derivative gain is very tiny increments in terms of the adjustments that it makes. So in this case, let's just key in a really big number and see how it behaves. You can see there's the flutter down there, but again, with such a large number, it's not really moving like the proportional. Again, as a matter of practice, I usually put it somewhere around half of whatever my proportional gain is. So I'm gonna it looks pretty good. The other thing I'm looking at, and what you want to test, here are these two gauges here. You want to kind of hold in different areas and try and get these two to kind of line up. They line up pretty good. The D value will be, I mean, really an extremely small value. Sometimes we don't even use a derivative in our tuning. You might have a 0.001 or a 0.002 in this case. It's looking like it's tracking so well as it is. I don't even know that I need to bother too much with the derivative here. And let's go ahead and just do a quick log again, so we can see. And it's tracking pretty well. I think for purposes of this video, I think you get the kind of the hint of it and how to do it, and you can go in and refine it even further and spend even more time on this. But I think that pretty much concludes this video. Hope you find it helpful, and good luck with your tuning.